Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to another design review meeting for Wolfram Language. This is part of our incremental language design series, looking at a variety of topics, different every time. Let's see, first up is threaded. Oh, it should be in the prototype build. Exciting, exciting. I thought we were going to call it threading. Threading or threaded? Rob, are you here?
Threaded, but
by the way, Rob, you sound like you're in some kind of underwater cave.
yeah, I know. I'm sorry. My headset is broken. I have one that's been on the way for a while, and I think it's just delayed by the Christmas rush. But
okay, no matter.
It is what it is.
Okay, let's go to the prototype build. Just think of all those elves who are going around with headsets now because yours hasn't arrived yet. Never mind.
Exactly.
Okay.
Christopher is here also.
Okay, great. All right, so let's take a look here at, this is exciting, threaded. That's very useful. That's a very nice thing. Okay, so now if I go times threaded, it'll do the right thing. If I go threaded this plus threaded AB, happy, happy.
But what about if the first one is if you do XYZ plus this plus threaded, if you know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Nice.
Happy, happy.
Is it always, I mean, have you sort of worked out if this is like always associative and stuff like that?
It is not. But Jose and I've tried to make it as associative as possible.
Well, what's an example? I mean, do you know of a simple example where it's not, just so we can see how bizarre it is?
I've got a weird thing that we could do. What would it do if it did this? Is this just absolutely flamingly hopeless?
What?
No, that worked.
I don't see what the problem is there.
Why did that work? I mean, okay, so what is threaded on its own?
Why wouldn't it work? Right? It's the same innermost dimensions, right?
So, but this is a key thing that Jose and I worked out, is so that if you have threaded and the levels are all positive or all negative, which they're all negative in this case, then we return a threaded object.
Mm-hmm.
So it can persist if all you have are threaded things.
Why do you want to put the -1 explicitly there? Why can't that just return threaded without the -1?
We possibly could in this case, but in cases, say if you mixed, if you mixed two different dimensions there, so if you had, AP, BP, you had a two-dimensional array in one of those, we have to have the level to make it.
Wait a minute. Why wouldn't it just default to the lowest level of the explicit object?
Possibly. I think it's possibly correct, Stephen. We could, in the cases where the rectangular dimension of the thing inside matches the negative level, we could probably eliminate that negative level. I think you're right.
Okay. Minor thing.
Yes.
So
Okay,
what's an example where it's not associative?
Jose had one. I can't remember one right now.
So is it just for certain heads, or is it arbitrary?
Just do set attributes of F listable.
Okay, listable thing.
Listable heads.
Okay.
With heads with the attribute listable.
We'll do Sorry,
sorry.
we'll do what? I mean, let's say, um,
Well, the threaded changes the behavior of all listable functions.
Right, now do f of threaded of, whatever. Well, give it another argument.
right, okay.
Right, so f is now taking, f is taking the place of plus or times. So if you take one of your arrays from one of your matrices from your plus or times example,
Yeah.
right, you'll get the right thing with f in place of times or plus.
Right,
is
right.
the
In this
point.
code, plus or times is just a head. There's nothing special done for plus or times.
So by the way, I mean, there's a bunch of weird cases. I'm not sure if there are any problems here, but what if you do threaded of threaded, right? So it'll thread over and then it will thread again with the inner threaded, if that makes sense.
Rob, did you consider that case?
No.
I mean, it'll probably work. I'm not sure it's really a.
What is threaded? What is threaded idempotent? I mean, and if I do threaded AB, threaded of AB.
Well, if the outer threaded doesn't go all the way to -1, if it only goes to like -2 or something, then you could imagine that the inner threaded could then do something. Oh,
Yeah.
That's pretty weird.
well, that didn't even do what I expected because it didn't.
Strip the outer threaded.
Expected that at least one
Well,
of the threaded would
Well, right, it listed, right, it listabled over the non-list inside of it, right?
Wait,
just-
no, it
just
basically
treated
treated
that
it
as-
Oh, I see. It just, it didn't do anything here.
Right.
It
Yeah.
didn't.
Right. It's just like an arbitrary expression.
because it wasn't a valid threaded or something. or-
Exactly.
Well,
It
no.
was not a
So
valid
what this
thread.
should have been is a threaded. This should have been a.
So
Yeah.
it needs to have a list. It needs to have a list in the first argument of the threaded in order for it to do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That seems right.
Yep.
Okay. How do you
It's a-
get rid of a threaded? I mean, does normal get rid of a threaded, or do you just say first to get rid of a threaded?
You just say first.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like an alternate representation of a list. It's a totally different thing.
Right. Now, how does it play nice with splice and things like that?
No.
Oh, I mean, I think
Splice is not a listable operation, right? It's not a threading like operation, right? It's a in-place modification of an array. I mean, right? Nothing, right? That
Oh, and
nothing
nothing
away.
disappeared too quickly.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. So
Okay, but you can't put. Wait a minute. When you put a splice, if you have a splice in here,
I don't know.
That'll
What,
just evaluate away, right?
yeah.
no. Yeah. See, the point at which we get to dealing with threaded is in the evaluator after the arguments have all been evaluated.
It's not hold first.
right?
No.
By the way, I mean, just does it already have some stuff so that it's faster and like does it already have sort of the optimizations that basically you can do packed array operations without having to transpose, if you know what I mean? Or
No, but it does not do that yet. I wanted to get this design set before we started doing that, and that's sort of some of the talk I had with Tom in the compiler meetings about having a threaded type would allow us to start doing that. I mean, Mark would have to put some stuff in the runtime library to do that, but that's relatively easy stuff.
This is really a lovely function. I mean, this is really so useful. If you just want to,
Yeah.
right. I mean,
Yeah, no, it's super useful. And I think the case you wrote right there is probably going to be the most common case where you have threaded
Right.
of some vector and you want to add it to a matrix.
yep.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit about the explicit level specs? Because I think that's worth hashing out.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's imagine. So are you saying here, if I were to say array A, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 or something,
Mhm.
then I were to say plus threaded XY, that will go at the lowest level, right?
That goes at the lowest level. If you look in the section on threaded array n, we actually have some tables showing you exactly where it goes depending on the level you put in.
My God. Is there something problematic about? I mean, it seems to me that this is. Look, I mean,
The only problematic thing with the level n is we don't have a mean for threaded blah level 0.
I see. Okay, hold on. So let's see. If we go level n here, and we say n up to 4, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Am I not seeing anything? Because it's just going to be the same. This is the same in all these cases, isn't it?
No, it's not.
No.
Right, the X's and Y's are going to be laid out differently.
Oh yes, so they are.
Yeah,
Right.
they are.
This one,
Right, so
I
this
see.
first one should be the normal. The first one, right, should be the normal listable case, right? Level
Yes.
1.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. So that's the positive levels. Now, what is the level? What would level 0 mean? Level 1 is okay. So you're saying standard listability is level 1.
Yes, because that's kind of at the level of the elements. So you combine at the level of the first.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. And -1 is the default for threaded and is at the lowest level. And
No, it's not. See, that's the other slight subtlety. If it's a vector, -1 is the lowest level. But if it's a matrix, -2 is actually the lowest level. Because this is one of the design decisions Jose and I discussed at length, and that is we should not allow threaded to create extra rank. So we don't want it to be like an outer product or something. So we don't allow it to create extra rank.
yes.
Okay.
So
just for concreteness, can you do that same table only with -n? So I presume we'll get the same results in reverse, or is there some subtlety I'm missing?
Should get the same result. I mean, I can't see the results with this framed thing. So
when you can't see it with the frame thing, what would you like me to do?
well, I don't know. I can read those tables, but maybe that's because that's what I'm used to. I don't.
Okay, what did you do here? You did a
maybe say
matrix
part
form?
for those tables. Maybe you could say part all, comma 1 or something, so that you get just the X's and the Y's out.
Okay, fine. Okay, so let's say this thing here. I do that. I say part all, comma all. What are we saying?
I
All,
think
comma.
try all, comma 1, maybe. I'm not sure this will actually be that much more clear, but
I think we need another all.
all, yeah.
And now we could say,
Yes, now you can see the difference.
okay. By the way, this might be a useful thing to have in the documentation, possibly. Something like this.
I mean, you should use an F that, you should use a listable function that isn't also orderless, but yeah.
Okay, so this is level 4, which is also level -1 here. So
Yep.
what was this thing about -2? I didn't understand that.
Okay, so suppose you put in threaded a 2-dimensional array.
Yes, in
Okay.
here. Okay, so what we're saying is in this thing here,
Mm-hmm.
then the point is that the lowest level of the 2-dimensional array better hit the lowest level of the main thing,
Precisely. Yeah.
rather than it appending a level.
Right.
I see. So in that case, threaded comma 4 fails. Why does that fail? I see, because if it were to attach itself at level 4, it would have to poke down yet another level.
Right on. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So why does -1 not work? Isn't -1 what you would expect to work?
Well,
here?
-1. So -1 is that's the level of the top of the level of the top of the thing inside of threaded. I mean, level
Why isn't it
-1.
Right.
Wait a minute. So
So-
this is similar to the pos and opos for an inset. That is, you have to say both when you stick the inset in, where in the destination is the inset going, and then what in the inset is going to that place in the destination.
Yes, in some sense. Yeah.
So what we've got is within the threaded, we've got in a sense, what we could be doing here, it's a bit like transpose. We could be doing something where we say this level in the threaded is going to be put at this level in the receptacle, so to speak.
Yep.
Well, right. So I guess another way of saying the same thing is the -2 means that the highest level of the contents of the threaded will be placed at the -2 level of whatever array it's being combined with.
Okay, so what it's really saying, and maybe we should have an explicit notation, is threaded of blah, 1 goes to -2, in a sense.
Yes.
Level 1 in the threaded is going to level -2 in
Mhm.
the destination.
And the default is 1 goes to minus depth of XXX. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. 1. Okay, so this is level 1 in the threaded is going to this level in the destination. And so in a sense, 1 goes to automatic, where automatic is depth of XXX, is the default. Now, is it useful? Would it be useful to give these two things explicitly? I mean, that's what we didn't do with transpose, and it was a mistake, so to speak. We eventually now have transpose explicitly using, saying what both the source and destination, if I'm not mistaken, levels are. So my question is, would anything other than 1 in the left-hand side here be useful? Probably it could be.
Sure, I think it could be. And if you wanted,
So the default is always then, so if we say comma n, that's equivalent to 1 arrow n,
mhm.
right? And if we say nothing, it's just obviously equivalent. It's equivalent to automatic, which is equivalent to minus the depth of the content of the threading.
I guess you could also think of the default as -1 goes to -1.
Why?
Yes, that's correct. You could think of it that way as well.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Why?
The
why-
lowest level of the XXX
Oh, I see,
is
I
put
see.
at the lowest level of the expression. Yeah. It's the same
Okay,
thing.
I
It's-
see. I get it.
Yeah.
So once we can monkey with this object, with this thing here, this is a reasonable default.
Yes.
Yep.
Which is an argument to be able to monkey with this left-hand side. So what is the way that you would do this similar operation using, what would you be doing? Would you be using transpose or flatten or join? We don't have a join at.
Well, you can specify the level of the joining. It's not super flexible, but right, because it requires sort of uniformity. But
It's really, I mean, it's really hard to actually do this without the threaded.
Right. I mean, I think the threaded, it's like a transpose and do the listing and then retranspose to get back to where you want.
You,
Is
you
sort
can,
of
you
the
can
way you
always do it with
normally do it.
transpose.
Do we like the name? I think I like the name. Threaded seems like a pretty reasonable name for this.
I think it seems pretty intuitive.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the arrow, I mean, I think this arrow syntax seems perfectly reasonable. So if we just give a number, which do we assume that it's 1 goes to?
Unless it should be. Look, the thing that's going to give the least errors is if it's the bottom of the threaded goes to a certain level in the destination expression. Isn't that right? That's the most likely to be correct. Something that's going to poke its nose out into the wilderness, so to speak, to mix many metaphors at the drop of a hat, seems like it isn't the best thing. In my argument, the default is the thing that is most likely to not give an error. Or maybe it's too obscure. If it's the bottom of the well, what do people think? If you're threading single vectors, there's not going to be much of a confusion.
Right.
If
you're threading,
if the XXX is deeper than the expression it's threaded with, can it possibly succeed, or is it always a failure?
It fails.
Okay.
Say that again.
If the XXX is deeper than the thing with which you're trying to thread it, it's always going to fail. It can't make it deeper on the bottom or at the top.
Right. We don't allow that.
Right.
Because then you get into things like outer products.
That's simple and understandable, and yeah, I like it.
Okay, so the only issue is it 1 arrow blah or -1 arrow blah?
Yeah.
Right.
So
and the thing on the left is referring to the threaded, right?
Yeah, the thing on the left is referring to the innards of the threaded. It's saying where does level n in the okay. If we say
I think it should be 1, is in my opinion. But
okay. Well, so it's saying, I think why did that not work? Okay, so if it's I goes to J, it says level I inside the threaded payload is placed at level J inside the container.
Right.
Okay. It's probably most intuitive if I is 1 by default.
I tend to think so.
Right. Okay. Algebra of threaded objects. What do we have to discuss here? Or did we already cover this?
I think we kind of already covered that.
Okay. Non-rectangular cases.
I'm basically advising against this because I just think
I don't think we care. I don't think we care. Let's implement it for the rectangular case.
Yeah.
And if it turns out that there are some obvious non-rectangular ones that are useful, let's consider extending it.
Okay, fine.
I think this is just wonderful. I mean, I don't really have much else to say about it. And hopefully you're going to have an efficient implementation of the whole thing.
Yeah, well, eventually, the current implementation actually works if you do a big packed array matrix plus plus threaded of a vector. I think it's even the default implementation is more efficient than transposing and adding and transposing back.
Okay, well, good.
So, and we can do much better than that. But yes, it eventually will be. I mean, that'll take some work from Mark, but but it's relatively easy to do it from the top down. So it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, excellent. This is a victory. I mean, I think this is one of the important things that we wanted to achieve with arrays, and this is, and we got it. Good stuff.
Okay, and what do we? So the final question is, what do we do with if somebody gives threaded of blah level 0?
What would you expect it to do? I mean, how is
I
it
don't
going
think it
to
should work. I think we should just give a message saying,
Well,
we
how
can't-
can it be? How can it knit onto? How can it knit itself onto level 0?
It can't, because we're not allowing it to increase or decrease rank. So
Right,
are you
so it's
okay
just gonna
with
give an error
threaded of blah 0 giving a message?
Yeah, I think so. I don't see
Okay,
how how could it do anything else other than that?
Good.
Because as you say, it can't do it
No.
without changing rank, so to speak.
Mhm.
Okay, Sander notes on our live stream that this looks like it'll be very useful. I agree completely. I was asking also, can algebra with threaded object with symbolic levels be done? That's amusing. That's amusing, but I think it's at this point surplus to requirements. That is, if the levels are X and Y, can we actually do sort of symbolic combination of threaded objects?
Right. Well, one of the things we already have to require for the algebra of threaded objects is that the levels specified be both the same sign.
In a sequence of threadeds.
Right.
Why? Why
Well,
is that?
if you don't, then you can't produce something that would go against a particular. So if you say threaded of blah 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 comma -1 plus
Yeah, disembodied threaded. I agree with you. You can't
Yeah,
possibly combine them.
exactly.
Disembodied.
Oh no, in a whole expression against an array, yes, you can have levels, but in this algebra where you're going to produce a threaded thing, we have to have the same sign.
Yes, but can you in fact? But you are doing that here. Yes. So this, I mean, this doesn't work with symbolic levels, but that seems a very well. I don't know. How
If it was
absurd.
X and X plus 1, maybe you could do something.
Is it worth it?
Well, the question is, if X, yes, if we can't do it with an X and a Y because you don't know if X and Y have the same sign, but you could do it with an X and an X plus 1.
It strikes me as pretty deeply surplus
I
to
think
requirements.
and the thing is, by the time we get to this, we're kind of at the point where we're kind of evaluating the listable operation. So I think it's a very marginal benefit.
Yes, I agree. I think this is wonderful. Yep.
Could possibly do it in the context of our symbolic tensors, right? We could add support, you
that's
give
an amazing
assumptions on the symbolic level and whatnot, and maybe there are simplifications we can do. I don't know if Jose has thought about that at all.
I don't think Jose is here today.
Yeah, he's not here today.
No, he's away. If anybody's thought about it, it would have been Jose.
Doug is commenting on this horrifying fact. That's because this is a raw rational number, and this is b times c to the -1.
Yep, I think that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Okay, the symbolic tensor case does seem interesting. I don't know what this corresponds to in terms of, in terms of physics-wise tensor notation. What on earth is this? Silence. Nobody knows. It's a slightly weird operation in terms of physics type tensors.
Right. It's sort of I think it's including sort of dummy slots, but I would have to think about it.
Just a question about naming and things. How does this relate to threading layer? Who knows? So ask the machine learning team. I'm not sure. Okay, Sandra is commenting that threaded comma X plus threaded comma X can combine. That is true. Whether it's worth combining them is not clear. With two identical threading levels. I mean, we don't tend to do that. Does splice have a level spec of some kind?
I don't think so.
Right. I've got a question. One of my pet peeves is when people need to insert in a function, sequence at. Okay, so this is a case. Let's just talk about this for a second. People want to insert a thing here that's going to unpack into X UV. How should they do it? And what people often do is this horrendous sequence at list UV. Right? What do we actually want them to do?
I mean,
I don't think there's
you'd
any-
only want that if you don't want the actual splicing, right? I mean, you would just do sequence of UV, unless
assume this is coming from
a
somewhere
list.
else. It's coming from somewhere else. That's coming from a variable. We say something like, with Q equals UV.
Yeah.
Then this. Okay, I absolutely hate this.
Maybe there could be a second argument to splice. That's basically
Yes.
the head that it would splice into.
But why doesn't splice just type into the top, enter in the top level head anyway?
No, because the whole point of splice is that it's inert unless it's in a list.
I see.
Otherwise, it's impossible to do anything with it.
Exactly. I mean, it's the reason it doesn't is precisely so people don't have to do splice at.
Right.
Yes. Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
But- yes, exactly. But if it had an optional second argument where basically you tell it one or maybe a pattern for a head that you would like it to splice into, with the default being list, then maybe that could work.
So in this case, it'd be F.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, and then you could throw the splice around any way you want, and it would only explode when it hits an F. I mean, the reason I hate sequence, why do I so hate sequence at? Perhaps it was because, this was one of the semantic disasters of SMP, was its analog of sequence, which was a function called NP for rather bizarre reasons, which just sprayed garbage everywhere. And sequence, what do people think about sequence? And it's, sequence has always been a slightly shadowy kind of function.
Sequence is a function that I think it only gets its only justification for existing is that it kind of has to come up in some pattern matching contexts. But otherwise, I think it's very weird.
Right, but this case, how do people feel about this
Yeah.
case?
This case,
really useful.
People use this for options filtering all over the place,
Yes.
and it works.
Although honestly, that's probably the most common use, at least that I've seen, is also options. But it's also in principle unnecessary, because options pattern, if people are actually using options pattern correctly, then it accepts any nested lists of rules. So
Right.
it shouldn't.
If you're doing vector calculus, right, you might use. I guess you don't necessarily need the sequence at, right? You do F triple at or some such.
Yes, I don't think you'd use this, but the thing is, this is a wrapper that means, what the heck does this mean? It means as soon as this is evaluated, unpack yourself in whatever you are contained in.
Well, that's what sequence means, right? The at is just delaying the creation of the sequence until the function actually starts evaluating.
Yes, as opposed to leaving it as a thing which will explode on contact in anything.
Right.
somehow. Yeah, Sandra is commenting that he often uses the hash. Yeah, I mean a
Yeah.
construct like this, which is, I think, more civilized. I mean, that's equivalent to this kind of thing. I mean, this is widely used. And the question
Right,
is,
and
do we-
I'll point out he's still using an at, so he's essentially doing the same thing. He's just sort of, I don't see that as materially different.
right, well,
Do you-
maybe we should bite the
so-
bullet and decide that sequence at is okay. But why does it need to be at? I'm confused. Why couldn't there be a function there that is just an at on Q? That is kind of
Q
like
has a head,
Well, it's because it's
right? The head of Q is list or something.
well,
Then
right,
it's-
but assume it's always a list. Assume Q is always a list. Then can there be something which is a pure, which doesn't chop the head off to do this?
something called like D-list,
Yeah, well, it's like splice.
melt list.
well, I mean, I think well, suppose we maybe could implement it using up values, not sure, but it right. I mean, the reason we use sequence is that sequence has special meaning to the evaluator, and right, we have attributes about sequence hold and whatnot for things that need to be prepared to deal with sequence specifically.
Well, in other words, the hack of A equals sequence of blah blah blah, not not having the sequence explode inside the assignment function.
or rule, or various others, and obvious, and things which are hold all complete, of course, also see the sequence explicitly rather than it having melting away.
Right, but what would it take to have something which melts with an at sign rather than melting with an at? Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, if Q is a list,
How's that?
I
different
mean,
from slice?
we'd need, right? I mean, I think we'd need special handling in the evaluator.
yeah, okay. I mean,
And I'm not sure. I'm not sure that removing one at is really
okay, ignoring the implementation issues. I'm just trying to understand the semantics. If this was okay, so what we believe would be a workable thing is this. Yes.
Yeah, and that can just be done with an up value, I think.
Right, but my question is, what? I don't quite understand. Why is this something I'm confused about the semantics of this? You don't want it to, I mean, okay, explain why.
Why you need
Why
the
is this?
The whole point is, imagine you have something like, here's an example. You say f of x comma y comma if some condition, then to otherwise splice of blah blah blah. Okay,
You don't want to explode inside the if.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole point of splice, is that you're going to pass it around before you put it into the list or the expression. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't use splice.
Okay, but so what is the issue here? The issue is somehow at some point it finds itself just sat in an argument. How can it tell? The question you're asking is, how does it tell the difference between the if and the f?
right.
How does it know when to explode?
Right,
Right,
and the point is with the sequence at right, because if is hold rest, right, it's only going to right, that sequence will only come into being and then splice away if that clause is actually evaluated. And right, so you're changing sequence to apply and therefore delaying the evaluation until the clause is actually selected. Now with splice, right, it would still be inside the if. So it would sort of, I think, run away. Not entirely sure, but I think it would run away unless you had the comma f in there.
Okay, hold on. Sandra is making the comment that there are two differences between sequence and splice. Sequence is var args. Splice takes a list.
Yep.
the reason that we're at-atting is because of the varargsness. I mean, we could perfectly well have a version of sequence.
Well, it's because of the varargsness, but I mean, I think it's also the reason that sequence is bad is not just because you write at, it's because you can't use it. I mean, you can only write, the point is that, okay, so the reason why, like when you're passing the queue, if you write, sequence at q, you can't pass that sequence at around. You can only pass the queue around, and you have to run sequence at the end, right?
Yes.
I mean, so you have to know that it's, well, whatever. I mean, it just seems like, it seems like having the uncontrolled explosion is really an important problem. I think that's the most important problem with sequence.
Right, and that's why splice only disappears inside of list.
Right, but my question is, okay, what is the signal that tells sequence to explode in this case? How do we think about that? What's the signal that causes this to happen? It's the argument.
Explodes. I mean, it's as long as it's not at the top level. I mean, it always explodes, doesn't it?
Well, no, not if the function is sequence hold.
Okay, but ignoring that case, what makes it during the evaluation sequence, because the evaluation sequence is depth first?
The
basic point is,
right, yeah, so that apply evaluates before, right? Arguments are evaluated before down values are consulted. Therefore, that sequence at will.
Okay, I've got a way to think about this, guys. Look, the basic point is, what one wants sequence to do here is something pseudo-lexical. You don't want it to do something dynamic, because it will, as you handle the bomb, it will explode. Rather, you want to place the thing, so to speak, before, right? The whole point here is this is essentially lexical. You want the Q to be exploded inside the F, but not when it's passed around.
Yep.
So my question, perhaps it's too weird, is there a lexical version? Could there be something which lexically is a wrapper where you say this thing here and literally within the F, lexical explode, so to speak, of Q?
Right, well, if the down code of lexical explode is sequence at Q, then yes. I mean, of course, that won't work inside of hold functions, but neither does sequence at Q.
But,
nor does splice for that matter, because splice also goes through the normal evaluation sequence. Right, one of the advantages of sequence as an actual head is that it disappears inside of hold functions, which are not hold all complete or sequence hold.
Apparently in Python, there's a single character that does this operation to unpack arguments from a list, presumably. But so my question would be, what will be the problem in having a function? This is like splice, basically, except that.
We could have like a two sequence or a splice into or something that, basically just evaluates and returns the sequence.
Or an unpack, for that matter.
I think unpack has too many other meanings.
Well, okay, but this is, you're saying splice into.
Or maybe it's spliced into.
Well, I don't understand. Yeah, okay, but the idea would be, so if we had a function that does this, what does the function do if it's nakedly used? Does it explode or not? See, that's the problem. It should not explode. It should only operate lexically. If you just type this and have it hanging around somewhere, it shouldn't do anything. Okay, how does it deal with this case here?
Well, it would be fine. That case would be fine, right? Because it would only evaluate if you actually,
Because if is hold all.
right.
Well, okay, but that case, like this Python unpacking thing will presumably fail miserably in the case of the if, because presumably essentially a lexical unpacker.
Well, I'm not familiar with the Python thing, right? But right, we can either do things strictly lexically, which is essentially what sequence does, right? If you do a sequence of AB or a sequence at list AB, right, that gets literally inserted modulo attributes, or there's the splice model, which goes through evaluation and works precisely in the same cases as sequence at. Well, if you're ending up in a list.
I'm sorry, I'm really confused again. What is the semantics between this case? How does it know? What is its signal to explode?
That it's inside
Purely
of a list.
evaluation.
It's that it's inside of a list.
No, but it's not inside a list. Splice, I understand. I understand how splice works. I'm talking about generalized splice. Okay. How does it know in this case here, if this is G splice, generalized splice? Okay. How does it know to and assume that the if you're claiming that the only way it can know is through when it gets evaluated.
Right. And it would need to be, I don't think a generalized splice can work unless you have the F inside of it.
I get it, but that's look, basically the question is, this is setting the fuse. Evaluation sets the fuse for the thing to be explode. If it didn't evaluate, the fuse is not set.
Exactly.
Okay, so the question is, it is horribly dangerous to have something where as soon as it is not inside a hold, it explodes, which is what's happening with sequence. And we've had to put various kinds of protections like sequence hold to prevent that being being included. Right? I mean, so that's the point. We have something, carrying it around and having it explode when it's naked, so to speak, doesn't make sense. So the question is, what other signal could this thing have to say, after it's come out of the if? I think it's right that the only way to do it is to say, if you find yourself in this head. Well, I mean, I could imagine other situations.
I mean, you could have an attribute, you could introduce a new attribute that's, melting, that if anytime it's in any melting head, it unpacks.
Yes. Yeah, but the default for a user function will probably be that you want that to happen. Is there any other signal that it could get? So in other words, let's say in this case, one signal is look at the head. Could it get anything from looking at the other arguments, for example? Could it have any kind of default here of what kind of functions it would by default splice into?
And see what the other arguments would by it. I mean, we could certainly put in like a list of heads there, or maybe a pattern. So if the head matches this pattern, it splices into.
Right. So blank would explode everywhere.
right? And would be completely useless, but maybe
Well, it's no, it'd be equivalent to
maybe
sequence.
blank question mark, attributes equals listable might be useful for something.
Well, blank would be
But-
the same as sequence at.
Yes, right. Splice of Q comma blank would be just like sequence at, which is not so terrible because that, in lazy programming, you could do that. All right, I
You
think
could have some sort of smart automatic where it's looking for like data structure sort of things. Right. Where generally it would want to open up
that's a reasonable point.
things that are unlikely to be logic structures and more likely to be data structures.
Yes. But in any case, it sounds to me like we should implement a second argument to splice. We've had some other comments on live stream. Let me just look at some of these here. Let's see. Brian mentions late binding, which I'm not quite sure what that is. I can imagine what that is, and I'm sure I've heard of it. Dan is commenting, maybe we need a shorthand notation for sequence at. I think that's just sweeping something even further under the rug. And my thing that gives information. Hold on here. Okay, to sequence. Function that works like this. What is this doing? Args of head. What the heck is that? Let me just see. What is this doing?
It's a function called args. That's
Oh, I see.
giving the args. That's giving the contents of anything.
How would that help us? Oh, I see. So,
Right. So if you define such a function, that's the function you could put, right?
instead of the splicer, that's the splicing function, which will unpack anything, whether it's a list or anything else.
right.
So it's kind of like a splice, but it doesn't need a list. I mean, because normally in splice, you would have to say splice list at, another function, f of x, y, if you wanted that to work. If you wanted to take those things, and I mean, melting them into an outer f is a flatten operation. Let's see. Next says maybe it's useful to have splice only into the head of its argument. What does that mean? Oh, that's an amusing idea. That's like what happens with thread, where thread will only thread things.
So it
Of
makes
the
more
splice.
sense if you put a CD, around the slice, add more arguments after the splice. Makes more sense.
Right. Right. So that is essentially, that's saying splice is acting as an auto flattener. Splice is treating f as temporarily flat, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, other than the fact that flat doesn't actually affect evaluation, but right, it affects pattern match.
No, I understand.
But
Well,
yes,
it does affect evaluation.
morally, that statement is correct. I'm just pointing out it's not literally true.
But it does affect evaluation. F of for a flat function, f of x is f of x. Right. If I set attributes f to flat, then it is the case that f of x, y, z is that.
All right. Yeah.
This is an interesting idea. This should be studied in my view, because splice is otherwise going to do nothing. It's just going to error out if its head is not a list. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, blue is saying, give it a way of saying when it explodes. Yeah, but this is the whole problem, is what are the signals? You know, during the evaluation process, there are different signals for what's going on. And it's not clear that there is a, you know, the thing is being evaluated is the only clear signal. Well, look, I think we've got two possible ideas. We've got the second argument of splice, which I think should be studied, and we've got the possibility of auto-flattening for a non-list function inside splice. And by the way, this will be completely semantically, coherent with the fact that if splice takes a list inside, it automatically splices itself into a list. Make sense? Okay, so can we assume you guys will take this? Yes. The study of splice. Who created splice?
I think it was Jose in combination with Constantine.
Okay, so Nick, can you take this, please?
Yeah, I will check with Jose when he's back in, and we'll go
Okay,
into more detail.
But both of these things. So if you think it's reasonable, try implementing it.
Okay.
Okay. Our next section here, which we should try and take a few minutes on, is the horrible world or the wonderful world, depending on how you look at it, of general utilities.
Yeah. So this is an inventory of the current system functions that are still living in the general utilities packlet. I think there's probably universal agreement they need to be migrated out of
Okay,
there.
fine. That's an implementation thing. It clearly needs to be done.
And basically, I've kind of broken up into categories. Planning on breaking up some of the list manipulation stuff and talking with Danny about taking lead on migrating those. The text processing I'll take care of.
Fine.
Yeah. I think
Fine.
most of these have a natural home.
All right. So the question is, what from general utilities do people still use? And the one that I think is commonly used is module scope. Do you agree with that or not? Anybody want to comment on that?
But what does module scope do? Is that the one that like finds all the instances of set and then makes a module out of it?
I think so. I think it's an auto modulating thing. It's an auto localizing function. I think it was about to become obsolete with new code assistance features that basically do that for you. So perhaps it's a problem that's going to solve itself. So perhaps there's no more to say about those.
The other one that I use, the only one that the two that I use frequently are print definitions, which probably shouldn't have a top level version, and the monitored map, which is probably about to become obsolete.
Yeah, I hope monitored map is going to become obsolete.
Yeah, I use a lot of progress monitoring stuff in general utilities. That should be absolute soon. Ensure directory, I use a lot.
What's that?
It's what I think create directory maybe ought to be. Yeah,
What is it called?
Ensure directory.
Okay.
It's create intermediate directories is true, and what else? There's some other distinction between that and create directory. If it already exists, it doesn't give a word.
Ensure
Directory, I think.
Okay.
I think that's what it's called. Yeah, if it doesn't create noise if it already exists, right? Because create directory gives a message. Yeah, so it's not groundbreaking, but I use it.
Maybe that could be the override target option for create directory, like create directory override target arrow false or something. I'm not sure.
Does create directory have an override target option?
I thought it did, but I don't see it listed. So either we said it should, or I guess the question is, do we really mean overwrite here, or do we?
No, we
just
don't.
It does not mean overwrite. Yeah, it just means, do you care if there was already one there?
Right.
It's kind of similar to what override target is, but maybe not exactly.
It's one of the messages that the system issues that would be first to be quieted if you had some sort of noisiness control.
Well, okay, so this is the desire there is an option to create directory that says, I don't care if the directory is already there, it's all good.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right.
I mean, or should there be another function that is called?
Wait, since when is create intermediate directories true the default? Did that change recently? That last note. I thought the default was false.
I think it's been true for at least a few versions.
Okay.
Okay, but so I think what this highlights is, I mean, there must be lots of other create functions. Are there not other create functions, like a file, for example?
There's create file.
And what does it do if the file already exists?
It issues a message.
And
Yeah, but all directories are just directories, right?
what do you mean by that?
In that, if
I see,
a
the
directory
only-
already exists, it's identical. I mean, it could be empty or not empty, but the directory itself is
No,
identical.
your
to the
point
directory
is
you
that
create.
a directory's only existence is its name.
Exactly.
Although that's not quite true, because it has permissions and things like that.
That's true, but create directory doesn't have a interface for that.
Right, but so your point is, are there other cases where merely to have the name is to have created the thing? Boy, it reminds me of in our physics project, the atoms of space, so to speak. Merely the only thing they have is their identity. Okay, in any case, but this is a directory is something. So your point is this is not a very common case, because usually when you say create, there's a question of what's the content, but there isn't in this case.
Right.
Bet there are other cases where that happens. I bet there are other cases with channels and things like that. Like create channel. If the channel, it is merely the
Right.
name of the channel that affects it. I'm sure there are other
It's
cases.
unlikely you'd be upset that it already exists when you're trying to create it.
Yes, the only case where you'd be upset is where there's content and you want to get rid of the content.
Right.
So, I mean, it seems to me we need an option that represents, it certainly can't be called existence warning. That would be way too weird.
Mhm.
Right. I mean, I suppose, well, one possibility is we just quiet the message, and at least in the case where you specify a name by default. Right? Because
Because your point is nothing different could ever happen.
right.
In other words,
Right.
the fact that the directory, the only way that you would be confused is if you thought you were making a fresh directory. No, there's
Particularly if
something
it's empty. If it exists and it's empty, there should not be a
Oh
message.
yeah, I guess that's the point, right? If you're assuming that the directory is empty, then you actually do need to know whether it's freshly
Yeah.
created or not.
It's likely that you'd care, but
Yeah.
I think
A lot
you
of
might
times
very
I
well
don't.
care, because you know that I can imagine all kinds of race conditions with parallel things where it's creating a directory and then something else is creating it too. I think
Right.
you want to know whether it already exists in general. I mean, somehow it reminds me of needs versus get. Get will always get it, needs only if it's needed.
Right. I mean, I have a lot of scenarios where I create a directory with a predefined name, and then I create files in it that are UUID based, and I know they're not going to collide, and I don't really care if there are other files there. I just
What would happen if we had a thing called needs directory?
I mean, yeah, we have ensure directory in general utilities. Yeah, that's why
Yeah,
I
I
use
think
it.
Doesn't seem like the right name, but
Sure, but
needs
it's
directory.
needs. I mean, I just think needs is needs of a context. Yeah, the term needs is a context thing in my mind.
Well, but needs directory would be, if you see that in a piece of code, needs directory blah, then it says created if it needs to be created, just like needs gets it if it needs to be got. And
Wouldn't it
otherwise,
be-
be happy.
I know. I think the present sounds wrong to me. I think needed directory is.
Why? I mean, you're going through the code, you're running a piece of code, and from there on out, it needs the directory blah. That
I
was my
suppose, but we don't necessarily.
I think
mean, what
ensure is a better
precedent-
name.
What precedent do we have for, we're saying what will happen in the future, right? We will need this in the future. I don't think we have a precedent for that. It's about either
Well,
the past or the present.
why
Right?
is
Plot
it?
does something in the present. Get.
Well, I'm sorry. Why is this any different from needs of a context? Needs of a context says load this content in if you need it. If you have to load the context explicitly. Otherwise, this is simply saying for code that is run after this, assume the context is in there. Similarly here, assume the directory exists. For code that's run after this, assume the directory exists.
Yeah, I suppose it just.
I propose that. I mean, the other people can. Let's consider this. Let's see what we think about it. But that would solve. That would solve Bob's problem, right?
Right. And by the way, Bob, create directory has defaulted to create intermediate directories, goes to true since version 6. So
Okay.
it changed, but it was a little while ago.
Okay.
That was in
So-
2007 or something.
Yeah.
Before we
Yeah.
move on to tally by, I was just going to mention, I didn't have it in the notes there, but valid property queue from general utilities is the most used general utilities function in the kernel startup code, which basically returns true if a given element is in a specified list, or if it's false, it gives a message and says blah is not a valid property of X. It's an argument handling thing that I'm guessing it looks like it's mostly used in signal processing and audio and a couple of other places as a convenience.
Valid
It's
properties.
valid property queue in general utilities.
So what's the syntax? So this isn't talking about your kind of properties that you do when you're communicating with the alpha server. Right?
No, it is specifically. So if you load general utilities and look at the usage message, it has a breakdown of it, but it's basically,
So this is basically a message maker.
yeah, it is a way to to conveniently use a properties framework without having to do your own message handling. It seems like it's basically, verify these input arguments for.
But where would you use the properties framework?
Oh, and it's trying to do its own pluralization, which I think is wrong.
Yeah, probably.
But yes, I think it's.
Well, so let's take this and see if we can understand how to make a better version of it. I'm not quite sure I understand why.
Right. I think that the point here is that it's, reducing boilerplate code when you, if you have sub values, which are, can be a bunch of strings, then this is sort
Yes.
of reducing the boilerplate error handling. But
Right.
probably need some thought.
Right. I mean, look, there's a general category of thing, which is a function has failed or a function is going to return unevaluated and you want to generate a message. I mean, look, this is a topic we should revisit. This is the whole guarded evaluate business.
Right.
All right. So we'll put that aside. Let's just see if we can hit one or two more of these.
Mhm.
Tally by.
So there's two parts to this being in the function repository.
I never use tally anymore. I always use counts.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, and so the second part of this is that the counts by example here, or the tally by second example, has a third argument where it specifies which of the instances of the matching function you return So the difference between those two outputs.
Oh, I see. I mean, so what I normally do is I take the result and I map whatever it is over it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe this is the same. We talked about this in some other meeting. I mean, about how there's a whole class of association functions that need some option like merging function or something like that, that basically tells it, in the process of constructing this association, when you have repeated keys, what should your merging function be? So maybe
Yes,
that
exactly.
makes sense in here.
Right, where the default is list in the case of something like counts.
I think the default is usually last.
Actually, for counts, it's nothing. But sorry, what I meant is group by.
Yeah, group by the second argument, you can give a rule and it does it. Something like this.
Well, yeah. Group by has a whole argument structure for representing this, though.
Representing what? Sorry, how to merge keys?
Yeah. Or actually, I guess it doesn't have a. Well, I think group by is actually a little bit different because group by will never have key collisions, will it? That's the whole point.
Yeah, it's keys. No, it produces a list.
Right, which is all the things that sort of collided in the keys, so to speak.
Right.
But the thing is, like, look at a function like association, or I think it's called association map, and its second usage, right? So here's a very common case that I use a lot is the second usage. If you set f to reverse, that effectively lets you, switch the orientation of all the rules, right? To the value.
I think association map is terrible. Because first of all, the first two usages have sort of nothing to do with each other. The two usages have nothing to do with each other. And of course, except for an incredibly small subset of functions, f, you're going to end up with an invalid association. And or, right, you might just silently lose keys, right?
Well, that's the big thing. I won't speak to whether or not the function overall makes sense, but the silently losing keys, I think, is the big problem here. And I think there are a few other functions that do that too. And that's why I'm just saying, if there was an option here, there was something like merging function, where you could set it to something other than last, then you could make it so it doesn't silently lose keys, or at least you could optionally make it not throw away the keys.
I tend to agree with Itai.
So in that second example there, you moved on.
The first usage is perfectly good and it's a great function and shouldn't be disparaged because of the second usage.
Right, but if you change that reverse in the middle example to f and then see what you get back, and
be valid.
and considering we have key value map, which does this but just doesn't wrap in an association at the end.
Well, but that's the big problem is it's very, I mean, this is a fairly common operation where you have keys and values and you want to basically reverse them. And the two ways you can write that is you can use key value map and then use association again. Or I think the better way is if you say normal and then you say group by last arrow first. But both of these sort of have the disadvantage that they kind of convert it out of an association then back in, and you kind of have to go through a list of rules form at some point, which is a little bit annoying.
Right, which sounds like an argument that maybe we need a reverse association function and just deprecate or ignore the fact, just silently disappear in the middle of the night, the second usage of association map.
Well, what are other? Maybe we should find out whether there are other uses of this. But look, the idea of having a merging function, we already have a thing called merging function. I think it's the same concept that will just decide what to do with multiple keys, with multiple elements with the same key. Seems like a sensible thing for this and other functions.
Same with key map. Key map is another one that really needs something like that.
Oh, right. Yes. Right. I mean, anything that messes around with keys needs a merging function, because otherwise newly colliding keys will kill each other, so to speak.
Or same with association thread, looking at C alsos. Yeah, I mean, anything that constructs an association or otherwise changes keys.
Right. Well, so it could be a key merging function, or it could be just a merging function. Maybe it should be called a key merging function.
Well, I would argue it should be merging because it's doing exactly the same thing that the function merge does.
All right. Well, so, okay. So fine. So let's investigate making it be merging function. Can we bring that to another meeting? Nick, can you take care of that?
Yep. Yeah, I'll work with Addison on that.
Okay. All right. Maybe we get one more and then
Until is really minor, but it's.
I don't see why we shouldn't have until. Anybody object to it? I mean, it seems like something that one occasionally needs. It's pretty obvious what it does.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, in most other languages, I've seen this called do while, but I mean, that's a very weird term. So maybe until is better.
Yeah, I think do while is not a very sensible thing. Until, well, wait a minute. Do while is the other way around. This is until you hit.
Right, which is what do while. Oh, right. So this is reverse.
There's two differences between this and while, right? One is it does it first, and the other is it's not ing the test.
Yes. It keeps doing something until something is true.
Do while would do it first like this, but it isn't the inverse of the test.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So do we like the concept of until? I mean, it seems useful to me. Until.
Yeah, I like it.
All right.
I can't think of any reason the name would collide. And I talked to Danny about it and he seemed on board. So
right, I guess I think the only real question is the order of the arguments. Right. So in your traditional do while, right, you have the body and then you have the condition.
But while has a test and a body, so this really should be the same thing.
Right. Well, I mean, do while in some languages, like in like various versions of C that have do while, the whole point is that they signal that it's running the body first by having you write while with no condition, and then after the while ends, you write do, and then you write the condition. But that is a little bit weird, maybe.
Sorry. So what happens here? So the point is that until. Sorry, you're running the test first, right?
No.
That's the whole point. So this is the basic case is you're going to be looping over this thing, but maybe the test isn't deep. Like here's a common case that I've had. It's like, okay, you start with some list, right? And you fundamentally want to run it until the list is empty. But before the first iteration, the list starts as empty. So you need to run one iteration to populate the list before the while loop kind of prunes it down. So that's when you do something like this, where you'd say, that way it runs the first iteration and then it does the test.
Right. So you'll notice that the usage. So sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm just pointing out that the usage message right there in the second line says that it performs the action prior to the termination test.
Right.
And so
well,
that's
this
why I'm
probably does.
suggesting maybe the order of arguments should be reversed. Not a clear-cut case, but that's my information.
Hold on a second. So you're saying until a body comma test.
I mean, with the name until, I think it kind of makes sense to reverse the arguments, because while it's like while test do body as opposed to do body until test, right?
Yeah. I think this requires a bit more discussion. We're probably not going to nail this right now.
We'll bring it back.
I think, yes, I would tentatively say, I don't really know what the other similar functions.
It might also be worth surveying a little bit, like what other, because I think there are several different names for this construct in different languages. So it might be worth looking at.
Yeah, let's find out what they are. See if anybody has a, take after. Here's an operation that I do all the time, which is find the position of the maximum in a list.
Right.
We don't have anything that does that, right? I mean, there's some WFR functions that do it.
Wait, it's take largest of list, take largest of list arrow index, comma 1.
Yeah, that's pretty ugly.
Or ordering, comma -1.
Ordering, comma -1 first element of ordering comma -1.
Yeah, and also first element of the take, take largest by arrow index.
Yeah, but this is in the distinctly obscure category. Have other people found that they want to do this? I mean, is this?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and I mean
I'm-
one argument.
I mean, the take largest with the rule in the first argument is a little weird, but I've
It's
learned to
pretty
use it.
weird. I mean,
I mean, I
basically-
know how to use it, so I use it now, but it's a little weird.
Right. And by the way, an argument for why, I mean, there is there is an actual advantage to the take largest as opposed to ordering, which is for example, sparse arrays. Sparse arrays work with take largest, but they don't work with ordering because they can't really work with ordering in general.
Why isn't there a position largest? Which is the take largest, which is simply equivalent to take largest with that weird index thing, which I had forgotten existed.
Maybe I'm wondering if there could be a more general version of this.
Yeah. I mean, we have position largest in the function repository.
I mean,
Well,
could there
what
be
is-
some more general position by? I guess not. I mean, if you had some, I mean, maybe a more general thing is just position of, position of list, comma, f of list, right? But
Yes, that's what it really is.
yeah,
Right. Position in list. I mean, that's what one wants is position.
well, although of course it's position is one of these very unsafe functions, and you have to tell it to run at level 1 with head 0 false. But yeah.
Would it make sense as a variation?
Well,
position
I don't know that
index?
that's necessarily true, right? I mean, if I would frequently use this on arrays, not just on flat lists. but-
Okay, well then maybe not level 1, but certainly
The
well,
default
something
to
like take largest and ordering, those only operate on level 1.
I think defaulting
makes
to level
sense.
1 is perfectly reasonable here. Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, good. Nothing.
Anyway, this is another function we should be discussing. Is some kind of position largest or unfortunately, I mean, one really wants a position largest by or position.
We have position index, which is different, but you could
What is
conceivably
position?
have.
I remember position index, but I can't remember what it is.
So it gives back an association.
association.
And by the way, I think position index is also one where it might be nice if it has a. I think there have been times I've wanted to have a second argument where you can do
Right.
things like either the depth or maybe the which things you care about. But yeah,
All right, we should wrap this up.
Yeah, we'll bring back a set of talking points for another meeting about position manipulation or position operations.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks much, everybody, and merry whatever, and thanks to folks on the live stream, and see you later.